I'm Senator John McCain, and it's always a pleasure to be back in Ukraine. This is my fourth trip to Kiev since brave Ukraine took to the Maidan last year to demonstrate for freedom and their country's independence. I keep coming back, and I am here now because I believe what is happening in Ukraine is about far more than Ukraine. It's about the principles of international order that have brought peace and hope to Europe and much of the world beyond Europe since 1945, and whether a world based on these principles will endure or not. Before coming here, I looked at a definition for the word invasion. It is as follows: an incursion by a large number of people or things into a place, an unwelcome intrusion into another's domain. Now, if we in the West cannot say clearly that what Vladimir Putin is doing to Ukraine constitutes an invasion of a sovereign country, if we obfuscate this truth because we refuse to face it, then we are living in Putin's world. Just as an invasion is an invasion, our world either has rules or it does not. It is either organized around principles of justice or it is not. If Putin can invade a sovereign country for no other reason than greed, belligerence, and imperial ambition, what is to stop others from doing so? If that principle does not apply in Ukraine, why should it apply anywhere else? Freedom is indivisible everywhere, or it becomes negotiable everywhere. And yet our principles will count for little if they're not backed by our power and resolve. High-minded rhetoric does not do very well against tanks. Ukrainian leaders I have met are not asking foreign powers to defend their country for them. Ukrainians are doing that by themselves, but they want and must have greater support. It was argued for months that providing arms and greater assistance to Ukraine could provoke a Russian invasion. But now Ukraine is being invaded anyway, showing that the real provocation for Putin has been the perception of Western weakness. What should be clear is that Putin's appetite only grows with the eating, and he will keep taking more until he faces a consequence he is unwilling to incur. Clearly, we have not reached that point, and it is urgent that we do. I have come to Kiev to show America's support for Ukraine's struggle and to urge my government and the world to do more to support this country, to urgently provide defensive weapons, intelligence, and other assistance that can help Ukrainians defend their sovereign country, and to impose truly crushing sanctions on Russia. We should do this not just for Ukraine's sake, but because fundamental principles of the European and global order are at stake here. The principle that sovereign states have the right to make their own free decisions, that wars of aggression should be confined to our bloody past, and that power alone should not be a license to oppress and subjugate. The horrors of the last century unfolded because good people too often failed to recognize what was at stake for them in the suffering of others. If Europeans and Americans and the civilized world do not recall that lesson now and do more to help Ukraine in its hour of greatest need, the darkness in our world will only grow. I'm ready to respond to your questions.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please, before asking the question, introduce yourself and pose a question. Sure. The question is going to be in Ukrainian. There is a device.
The question is, when the U.S.
I'm sorry to say we should have acted according to the Budapest Memorandum long ago. And the fact that we have not, I think, indicates that it'll be very difficult to convince other nations that have nuclear weapons to give up those weapons in exchange for guarantees. Because clearly the Budapest Memorandum, which guaranteed the entire territorial integrity of Ukraine, including Crimea, has been totally violated.
Just 1 second.
I have my.
Yes.
Natalka Wisnia, Studio 1+1. Is there any chance that we in Ukraine and the entire world will see the American weapon in checkpoint Izvarine in Luhansk region in Ukraine?
I'm not sure I understood that question. Did you?
I can repeat it actually. Is there any chance that Ukraine and the whole world will see the American weapon in checkpoint Izvarine in Luhansk region this year?
Well, I'm not sure I, again, truly understood your question, but I do believe that events in Luhansk and now Mariupol, where Russians are closing in there, where the previous encirclement of Donetsk is now broken by the Russians because of the outright invasion of estimates of 4,000 Russian soldiers and tanks and heavy equipment. And it's very clear, unless they are stopped, that they will be achieving a land bridge to Crimea. They achieve a land bridge to Crimea, then the next step is pressure on Moldova, whereas we know Transnistria has 1,400 Russian peacekeepers, and already Vladimir Putin is putting pressure on the Baltic states as well. That a specific checkpoint, frankly, I am not that familiar with.
I think, Senator, the question is there a chance that there would be supply of U.S. weapons to Ukraine to help it protect and defend itself this year?
As you know, Senator Menendez, who is of the other party, of the Democrat Party, and I'm a Republican, was here last week. Senator Levin, who is an important senator, was also here. We are committed to doing everything we can to convince our government and our colleagues in Congress to pass legislation which would then allow and require the supply of arms and defensive weapons to the Ukrainian military. Right now they are being outgunned, and there is a very serious imbalance as far as weapons is concerned. And without additional weapons, particularly defensive weapons, it will be hard to prevent the Russians from further aggression, which eventually could lead to a landlocked Ukraine.
Thank you. We have a question in the middle.
I'm Nikolai Vorobyov. I'm Ukrainian journalist. Thank you, Mr. Senator, and thank you for your support. We met in DC in Atlantic Council like 3 months ago during your presentation. So I have, and since that time, the situation has changed dramatically in Ukraine. So I have 3 short questions. The first is, what do you expect? What will be consequences after the NATO summit right now in Wales, in Great Britain? The second question is about...
Could I answer that one first and then take the second?
Yeah.
What we are hoping fervently hoping that there would be agreement for additional sanctions against Vladimir Putin. That is what was promised if Vladimir Putin committed further aggression. There is no doubt that we've now turned into an outright invasion. And so we would hope that very stringent sanctions would be not only considered there, but by the other in the European Union. But also, I hope there would be a commitment to provide Ukraine with the defensive weapons they need. Now, I don't know if that will happen. But if it doesn't happen, in light of an invasion, what does that tell Vladimir Putin? It gives him a green light. The reason given for not providing weapons to Ukraine was that it would provoke Vladimir Putin. The opposite has happened. Because we didn't support Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has become emboldened and is now in an outright invasion of a sovereign country. Your second question.
Yes, you probably knew my second question, and it would be, what kind of weapon can Ukraine expect? Because
I think among other weapons, anti-tank weapons are very important because obviously armored vehicles has been a major part of this invasion that the Russians have been carrying out. We also need very badly to provide them with intelligence capabilities, which we have, to provide them with the information they need on the battlefield. It is right now, it's very difficult because they don't have the intelligence information that we could help supply them. Other equipment of all kinds and of anti-armor, anti-air even, all kinds of defensive weaponry, all of which they do not have at this time.
Thank you. We'll come back to you. I'm sorry, but we have other people asking questions. Thank you. Please, in the back.
Associated Press, could you say if announcing for tomorrow ceasefire by President will help to find a solution to set up the crisis in Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine, and in order to just play with Russia? Thank you.
Well, what Vladimir Putin would like to see is a frozen conflict. There's an example of this, and it's Georgia, where Russia continues to occupy Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Moldova, where there continues to be in Transnistria 1,400 Russian, quote, peacekeepers. To allow the situation to be frozen in place would be giving up a great deal of the sovereign territory of Ukraine, not to mention a very important part of the economy of Ukraine as well. There must be a withdrawal of Vladimir Putin's military from the border. Until this invasion took place, the Ukrainian military was doing pretty well. They had both Donetsk and Luhansk surrounded, and they were succeeding. And obviously, now that whole situation has been badly reversed.
Sir, we have a question in the front.
Radio Free Europe, Yana Penentika. From your point of view, do sanctions work in the way they should, in the way that America and Europe planned?
Sanctions do work, but these sanctions have been basically a slap on the wrist. They have not really done significant harm to the Russian economy. And Vladimir Putin is willing to sacrifice some of his country's economy to control eastern Ukraine and perhaps landlock Ukraine. Look, Vladimir Putin wants to restore the old Russian Empire. He cannot stand a free, democratic, prosperous Ukraine, because sooner or later the people of Russia would want to have that kind of lifestyle as well.
Voice of America
Right.
here, if possible.
One more?
But yeah. No.
You mentioned the necessity of crushing sanctions. You mentioned the necessity of crushing sanctions. To your opinion, are there any sanctions that could stop Putin at this stage? And what kind of sanctions that must be?
Well, I think first of all, it'd have to be sector sanctions rather than individual people or individual institutions. It would have to be sector sanctions, and they would have to be very severe. And some of them may be cause some economic impact in those European countries. But what's at stake here, obviously, is far more important, at least in my view. And by the way, I'd like to say that I applaud the decision of the French government to at least suspend the sale of those 2 warships to Russia. I think that's significant. I'd like to see them absolutely cancel it, but I was glad to see them suspend. So there can be punishing sanctions. Sanctions have worked in some cases, but not all. And it depends on the severity of those sanctions. But the sanctions that have been enacted so far, put yourself in Vladimir Putin's shoes. He's paid a very, very low price, and certainly not one that would discourage him. Yes, the ruble has fallen and their stock market has fallen some, but his popularity in Russia is way up, and his overall goal, as I said, to restore the Russian Empire is he's making significant strides. And again, he cannot afford a free, prosperous, democratic Ukraine, because sooner or later the Russian people would want the same thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your presence. Thank you. Дякуємо, колеги. Ми на сьогодні завершуємо.